So with that, before we start, are there any questions?
Why do you burn it?
Burning is part of what generally keeps that ecosystem going. I burn it because what you typically do, you get all this biomass above ground. If it stays above ground, number one, it creates a blanket of insulation. These are mostly cold season species. And so it keeps the ground colder longer with that insulation. These plants don't do as well. When you burn it, you recycle all the nutrients. And many species of prairie plants are just, basically, they're stimulated by fire. They just flourish with fire. In the absence of fire, what you get is a lack of vigor in your prairie, and you start getting invaded by woody plants. We're so far east. Now, prairie is native to Ohio. At the time of early settlement, there was anywhere from 1,000 to maybe 2,000 square miles of tallgrass prairie in Ohio. But we're getting, in fact, the last few years, we've been getting in excess of 40 inches of annual rainfall. That's suitable for forest. So we're in an area where forest will quickly invade prairie areas. The only reason that prairies remain today is because in those areas where prairies existed, typically they were on the divides between rivers. The Darby Plains, the Sandusky Plains, the Piqua Plains, were areas that were very poorly drained, flooded in the springtime, too wet for trees. Later in the season, dry out, soils would crack, subject to prairie fires, trees couldn't survive. That's why prairies survive. When you artificially create a prairie, if you're going to keep a prairie, you're going to have to burn it or mow it or cut it, do something to keep the woodies from invading it or quickly.
Is mowing an acceptable alternative?
Mowing's an acceptable alternative on a small basis. The problem with mowing is once you've cut the material, you're not recycling the nutrients. And if you leave it on the ground, then you're creating that blanket of insulation again, so you have to rake it off. Well, if you rake it off, then you have to go in and fertilize to jack up the nutrients. Otherwise, you've deprived that system of functioning the way it should.
Would you have to burn every year?
No, you know, it's interesting. That was a big issue. Nature Conservancy struggled with this on their prairies a number of years ago. Like, how often should you burn? What would be the natural burn cycle? And they tried to do things around the country, like look at tree borings and so forth, but most of that was historic stuff. It just the sellers. It didn't really make a lot of sense. And some of you may know the book that Doug Ladd did for the Nature Conservancy on prairies, and Doug arranged for a visit with TNC folks from out the Midwest, as well as many agency people from out the Midwest several years ago. And I went to Walpole Island, and this will get back to your question too. Walpole Island is across from Detroit. It's a sovereign Indian nation, and they have prairie and savanna. And I remember Doug asking this native guide that we were with, he said, well, how often do you folks burn the prairie? And this Native American gave him a look like, only a white man would ask that question. He said, well, we burn every year, and sometimes twice a year. You do? Yes. Well, how long have you been doing that? Again, one of these looks like, well, my father, his father before him. You burn every year? Yeah, you always have. Well, why? Maintains the prairie. And it's fun. It's part of that cultural, social thing. And I have to admit, if you've never seen a prairie fire, it has a certain appeal to it.